Okay, so we'd been at the yard and we discovered that horrible osmosis issue we had with the boat, and then that was gel coat planed back. If we took 4 mil off the hole underneath the boat, and then that was fiberglass. So the lamination, fiberglass laminating, was done at Sandringham Yard in the boat yard in a tent. So we created a booth around the whole boat, which was attached to the where the rubbing rail goes in the boat, and that was brought down. So we had a whole booth at the yard, and then all that glassing was done. But obviously there has to be a paint coat put on that. So when we took the boat to the shed up in Brayside, then obviously the underneath of the hull had to be painted. And then obviously you have to mask up the rest of the boat to protect that from any misting paint or falling back down to the job. So it was a lot of masking, a lot of sanding, and it was decided to do that process in the shed because then you could get a much sheerer finish. Even though the underside of a boat is going to be anti-fouled and it's going to be sprayed on, we want to make it as smooth and as slick as possible. This gives it its efficiency through the water. So we obviously, below the waterline, that was all painted, and then we're looking at the above waterline stuff. So then the above waterline is, obviously we had this beautiful flag blue hull, which we wanted to achieve. Flag blue was a tense colour for a lot of people. There was this thought process about, should we go flag blue? But the owner, he just wanted flag blue, and that's what we went with. You run the risk of a flag blue hull, and some boats, especially FLYBRIDGE boats, they can tend to look a bit squat in the water once you've done that. But what really works with the Bertram are those highlights, those bars, the blue bars on the cabin and on the FLYBRIDGE top. Those decals really stop the boat looking like it's a wedding cake. Like the boat will appear to squat down on the water as it moves further away from you because of that flag blue hull. But those lines in the cabin stop it looking like a wedding cake on a skinny hull. So that all worked, thankfully, really, really well. So we opened up the rear floor, and those familiar with Bertram 35s, underneath the cockpit floor is the fuel tank, but in front of the fuel tank is also the water tank. So the cockpit floor can actually be lifted. This one is having a teak deck. This one was having a teak deck put over the whole lot, so we had to get this right from the start. We do have an access. We have built an access port through the engine room bulkhead, so there's actually a demountable access port there, but yeah, you'd have to be a smaller bloke than me to get in there, put it that way. But when we took up the floor, we noticed that the exhaust hoses were quite brittle. So obviously then the decision was made to replace all the exhaust hoses. So that section, and if you are looking at doing a Bertram 35 yourself, that back section of the fuel tank where that all is, if you're going to teak deck over that, you really need to pay attention to getting everything in there right. But there is space that you can actually create. And we decided to put a much lower profile water tank in, which sits a lot lower, so that you can, and actually, if you had a small enough decky, you can actually get into that space. So we created a crawl space on top of the water tank and between the engine room watertight bulkhead and the fuel tank as well. So we can still get access into that. But there's not really any serviceable items in there, apart from the water tank fittings themselves. The fuel lines go straight through there, so that void should never really need any attention. We worked out and measured up the teak deck, and obviously ordered all the teak, and there was quite a few little bits of teak trim in the boat that needed to do. But building the teak deck was decided not to. There is a section in the Bertram floors where you can actually lift out above the engine hatch. You can lift out the whole hatch there. But because we'd done so much work in that space, we decided to go right through with a continuous pattern of teak and just the one edge, rather than creating a hatch edge in the middle of the floor. So the decision was made to make a complete teak deck in the cockpit. And you can see some of these photos here of Andy sort of making them out. It was made in two parts, obviously laid out onto a board, there before them being put in place. Well, Well, you see it from the photos, it's just a nest of spaghetti in there. Wiring wise, the wiring, it was just can of worms after can of worms after can of worms. And what often happens in boats like this is over the years there's been this put in, and then this upgrade of the navigation system's been upgraded. So this is a 40-plus-year-old boat. And we found 7 through hull transducers on this boat. So, and some of them were in glycol buckets. For a glycol bucket, it's a solution next to the hull. It's a solution in a bucket that sits on the hull that has the transducer, so the transducer can sound through the hull. So there was 2 glycol buckets. There was all these different through hull transducers, and it was just, we knew that we just had to go, right, fix it, do it once, do it right. And that literally meant pulling all those through hulls out, glassing them up. So there were quite a few hulls that were, you know, surplus requirements, but those holes in the hull still ran a risk of getting water ingress for osmosis and things like that. So yeah, we had 7 transducers. And the last one that was put on there was actually on the back of the boat. And it was what you do on a trailer boat. You put it on the back of the boat. So you get the idea of the kind of levels of workmanship and craftsmanship in the electrical space. You'll see a couple of photos there of wires that were just minutes away, or seconds away from catching fire, basically. But also a lot of the cables, so you get the older cables and you can feel the cable, we call cable cancer in them. They're quite brittle, the cables are brittle, and you run your hand along, fingers along, and you can feel these bumps moving in, and that's literally points of corrosion swelling the cable. When you do that, there's no point. You can still get connection through it, but you're going to get loss, you're going to get resistances, and so it's all got to come out. But what happens in the past is people will wire something new in, and they'll just run their wires and then wrap up the old wires and leave it all in there. This is all potential for massive amounts of corrosion and latent current going around all sorts of areas of the boat. So it's better to, when you run new cables, get rid of the old stuff. But the FLYBRIDGE hardtop, wow, that's a scary prospect for anyone looking at doing one of these. We used a 32-foot Caribbean, which International Marine were very happy to make for us at a price, of course. But International Marine were really supportive in this project. Not only did they supply us with new belting for the trims, but we also got them to build this hardtop for us. And the 32 sort of fit the size and shape and dimensions for the 35 Bertram. But you can imagine the Bertrams weren't built with this. This is one of the few with a hardtop, and some hardtops are done right, some hardtops are done wrong. And I've seen hardtops and Bertrams that make it look like someone's just stuck an old English telephone box on the top of a boat. You know what I mean? It's the angles at the front are too sharp, and the back's actually tilting back that way, and it's all just out of space. And putting a hardtop on a FLYBRIDGE can make or break the lines, the look, and the whole appeal of the boat. So it's easy when you say it quick, whacking a hardtop on a boat, but if you want it to look just right, the amount of time and mucking around and positioning it on you'll see in the photos the timber jig we had, and we pushed it this way and then went that way and this way and that way, and we're all standing around looking at, oh, that looks good, looks good. It's really hard also to get that in the shed, because you can't get a really good distance perception of it. You can only stand so far back from it in a shed. So you'll see there's a photo there with Dean from Sandringham Marine. He's putting little tapes, masking tapes down so that we can actually see the angles. That process, that was like one of the hardest the decisions, to just go, okay, that's it, this is the way it's going to sit. And then of course everything is then built to that. So we suspended the hardtop in mid-air so that all the stainless could be measured to all that. And when you look at the final product, it works. Like it just works. It's just the right proportion. So yeah, for my money, if we were doing it again, I would do that. I would get the 32 Caribbean roof, because it sort of fits. It's a little bit more modern. It's got a little bit more shape to it, but it still fits in with the, I believe it fits in with the look of the FLYBRIDGE, because you've still got that rake and that shape at the bow. So a lot of people will just build a square sort of hard top with a bit of camber in it. I think what we did looked better, but I'm a little bit biased, obviously.